And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
The day after Christmas, as you get things going again on Thursday morning, we're going to start out the day with widespread IFR across the north and eastern Gulf Coast, spreading through the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and all the way through the upper end of the Tanana and the Yukon valleys. Most of the Yukon Valley itself should be VFR. Most of Southwest should be okay as far as visibility and ceilings go. IFR concerns will linger around St. Lawrence Island and coming out of the Bering Strait, and also across the western Aleutians, with MVFR preceding that, and also working through the Alaska Peninsula into Kodiak Island. Most areas north of the Brooks Range summits will see MVFR, and a few places may see hit and miss IFR, but the coastal locations, generally north and east of Wainwright, all the way past Utqiagvik and east toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, will likely see VFR conditions, but east of that, you'll start to run into marginal weather once again. That's going to shift around a little bit as a trough of low pressure is passing through. We'll see IFR sinking southward into the Chukchi coast there with hit and miss IFR across some of the summits. IFR lingers around St. Lawrence Island, also across the western end of the chain, and we'll continue to see IFR holding over southeast and a large part of the Alcan border, pushing westward toward Tanita Pass, all the way up into the interior, maybe sneaking its way into Fairbanks, and then south central and westward, generally VFR throughout your afternoon. Friday morning, hit and miss IFR across the north slope, marginal conditions even further south than that, but south of that, we see VFR all the way through Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, southwest, most of the middle Yukon Valley, and through the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island. Hit and miss IFR continues across the Bering Strait down towards St. Paul and St. George, looking for IFR just south of the Shumagon Islands and south of Kodiak Island once again, and along the higher train for southeast, looking for marginal conditions across the north and eastern Gulf Coast, but notable improvements over what we started out with for your day on Thursday. For Friday afternoon, IFR returns to southeast. You'll see some marginal holes in there, generally south and around Petersburg, but looks like mostly IFR conditions for southeast. Marginal conditions all over the Gulf, Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula into Cook Inlet. Generally north of Kenai and Soldotna, though, you'll start to see some breaks into VFR, and then most of the interior, southwest, Norton Sound, all looking to hold at VFR levels. IFR around Kodiak Island and up the west coast and into the Bering Strait, and a wide swath of the north slope looking at IFR, with coastal locations, though, holding at marginal conditions. Here's your pass conditions for details on Thursday. Then Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass we expect to hold at marginal levels. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass cold, but VFR. Rainy Pass leaning over to VFR conditions as we go. Windy Pass expected to be MVFR. Isabel Pass, we like to say IFR for your daytime on Thursday. Mentasta Pass probably pushes back to IFR as we get into the day. Tanita Pass looking like instrument flight rule most of Thursday. Portage Pass starts there, but then should see a little bit of improvement as we get through the day. And then IFR concerns are expected around Chilkoot and White Pass through most of your Thursday and maybe into early Friday morning. Freezing levels show a lot of cold air is dropping southward across the Alaska Peninsula and all the way through the Bering Strait. The surface freezing line snaking well south of the Shumagons and Kodiak Island, back into Prince William Sound, and then holding over the higher train over southeast, with a little bit of warmth coming up the eastern part of the Gulf, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 foot levels showing there. Icing potential will be decreasing across the region because the amount of cold air is substantial as driving southward. So while there is moisture there, it's not going to be at the levels or at the temperature that would be conducive to widespread isolated moderate icing or worse at this point. Out across the central and western chain, below 8,000, above 2,000, you can run into a little bit of isolated moderate, and also across the southern end of the Alcan border into parts of Prince William Sound, the north and eastern Gulf Coast, below about 9,000 to above 4,000, and that will generally hold for most of southeast to Prince William Sound, which is just typically below 8,000 feet there for your Thursday. Looking at the jet stream, we can see high pressure is in control of the southern half of the Gulf of Alaska, with a trough across the west coast and a pronounced trough leaning east and south into the North Pacific. You can see that driving force coming in around 150 knots, but we have a lot of cold air dropping southward, and that's working with this fast-moving river of air right here across southwestern Alaska, moving into the northern Gulf at around 70 to 110 knots. A complicated pattern, but one that will keep us very busy for the next several days. Northerly winds driving in across the west coast, 20 to 25. Look for lighter winds to the east. Westerlies moving across the Gulf, 50 to 55, and southwesterlies banking into southeast Alaska. High pressure out across the western Bering Sea, keeping that cold moving in down the west coast to 3,000 feet. A trough of low pressure works out of western Canada and into south central. Again, those northerly winds coming in around 30 to 40 knots across south central, and generally 10 to 20 across the interior. Turbulence, we'll be watching out across the chain below 4,000 feet for some isolated severe. Most of southwest, Kodiak Island Island and generally west of Cook Inlet below 4,000 feet in parts of southeast, looking at turbulence.